Hello and welcome to my video about social learning theories. So this is a part of the learning approach. We are part of the AQA new spec using the textbook AQA Psychology for A-Level, Year 1 and AS. If you want to follow along, it's page 108 to 109. Now with each one of my videos I always have an objectives page. The objectives for today's video is to understand the vocabulary used for the social learning theory and to discuss, understand and evaluate the various features of social learning theory. Now, after I've done the speaking, I'd really recommend you pause the video to ensure that you have got these keywords down. So we've got the social learning theory. It's a way of explaining behaviour that includes both direct and indirect reinforcement, and it's combining the theories from the behaviourist approach with the cognitive approach in itself. So it is a bridge theory. Imitation, which simply just means copying the behaviour of others. Identification, which is the observer associates themselves with the role model and wants to be like them. So they would have attributes in which they have identified with, which they would see as desirable or want to imitate. Modelling, which is from the observer's perspective, modelling is imitating the behaviour of a role model. From the role model's perspective, modelling is the precise demonstration of a specific behaviour that may be imitated by an observer. And the last two keywords are vicarious reinforcement, which is reinforcement which is not directly experienced but occurs through observing someone else's reinforcement for a behaviour. This is a key factor in imitation in itself. The other key term it can be called is observational learning. Now the mediational processes are cognitive factors, i.e. thinking, that influence learning and come between the stimulus and response. So this is the internal process that happens between the stimulus and response that then generates the response in itself. So as I said, I'd really recommend that you stop and get these keywords down because they are essential for this unit. Now, where did it all begin? So it all began with Albert Bandura, who is the main psychologist for this perspective. He developed social learning theory to show the basic rules and terminology as operant and classical conditioning, such as learning through association and reinforcement. So these basic rules and assumptions are still applied throughout this perspective. However, he did argue that operant conditioning and classical conditioning do not account for all human behaviour. There must be something else that is happening that then generates certain behaviours. There must be a difference between the stimulus and the response. There needs to be something in the middle that then helps to generate that response. Now, this is what he was really interested in about and investigating, and this is what the social learning theory is trying to give us, is that little red line in the middle, trying to tell us how the response is generated. Now, Bandura's study had 36 boys and 36 girls with a mean age of 4 years and 4 months. A baseline test was run to see what their natural aggression was of each one of the children. They were then distributed across the different groups to ensure one group was not more aggressive than the other. Now, the way in which they did this is through the experimental design of using matched pairs design. This would be having each one of the groups and matching them based on characteristics, and then separating them across the 3 groups to ensure each one of those groups has the same person with each one of those characteristics within it. They were then divided into these 3 conditions, and they had various things in which they were exposed to. So group 1 was exposed individually to an aggressive adult model who continuously hit, punched and kicked the Bobo doll. Group 2 were exposed to a non-aggressive adult model who played quietly in the corner of the room with the children, and Group 3 used a control group where they were not shown a model. Now, I want to give you just a few seconds to ponder. Which one of these groups do you think showed more aggressive tendencies after the role model? So I won't reveal the answer just yet. After the exposure, the children were shown individually to a room for 10 minutes where they were presented with some toys, but they were told they weren't allowed to play with them. This is really to see how aggressive they were at that point. And each child was taken to another room containing a Bobo doll and a mallet and a choice of toys. They were observed for 20 minutes and observed through a one-way mirror, and all behaviour was recorded. So the one-way mirror really just allowed them to observe the children without them being aware that they were being observed. Now, the answer to my question, it was found that the children who were exposed to the aggressive model showed more imitation of the model's behaviour than the children of the other two groups, with the aggressive acts being similar to the models. So they were more prone to copying and using the same behaviours that they witnessed from their model. So for Bandura, this was evidence of observational learning or vicarious reinforcement. Now, the assumptions of the social learning theory are very simple. It supports the assumption that we learn through our environment and the interaction with our environment. He argued that we primarily learn through observation and imitation of others within a social context. So we'll see what the consequences are, etc., and we'll be more willing to copy them based off that. This is where the social learning theory really came to life, and it suggests that learning occurs directly through classical and operant conditioning, as well as indirectly, so through observation as well, which is the key thing that is often overlooked. Now, as we know by now, vicarious reinforcement is indirect learning that takes place with the individual observing behaviour of others. So the learner may imitate this behaviour, but in general, imitation only occurs if the behaviour has been seen to be rewarded, so reinforced rather than punished. So vicarious reinforcement occurs, thus the learner observes the behaviour, but most importantly observes the consequences of the behaviour. And realistically, this is the example that we've got on the screen here. So as a child, you're walking through a supermarket, you notice a boy pushing items off the shelf onto the floor. The mother of the boy stops the boy and puts him in the trolley as punishment for damaging the items. So therefore, you've seen, okay, he's been punished, so therefore I'm not going to replicate that behaviour. So this is vicarious reinforcement at one of its finest moments. The child observes the behaviour, sees the consequences, and it's not going to repeat the behaviour that it's witnessed from the other child. Now, the next section, we're moving on to this role of the mediational processes. So, SOT is often described as the bridge between traditional learning theory, otherwise behaviourist theory, and the cognitive approach, due to the focus on how mental cognitive factors influence our learning. These mental factors mediate or intervene in the learning processes to determine whether a new response is required. Now, there are 4 mediational processes in learning which were identified by Bandura, which we're going to talk about more now. Now, these are the 4 processes that an individual goes through when learning. So we've got attention, retention, motor production, and motivation. Now, attention, simply the individual pays attention to someone else's behaviour. It picks up on what they are doing. Retention, they store a mental image of what has happened and they memorise the behaviour that they have just witnessed and they've observed. Motor reproduction, they practice the behaviour themselves. They replicate it, they try to create the same movements in a sense. Motivation, they were given a reason, they may want to use this behaviour. Now, these 4 processes can be broken up even more so by putting them into 2 categories of learning and then performance. As you can see with my little diagram here, the attention and retention is put into the section of learning. So it is stored and it is retained and it's observed. Meanwhile, motor reproduction and motivation goes within the performance sections. So the fact that individuals are going to be copying behaviour and recreating it in different environments. Now, the processes that we have just described are not necessarily free-flowing. They don't follow one another straight away. Now, the learning performance sections don't always happen at the same time. They can store a mental image or representation within their mind, and they can access this at a later point and perform the actions that they've witnessed or observed at another time. Now, they are very easy to see how they interact with one another and how actually those 4 processes can be seen when we're looking at learning and particularly copying behaviour. Now, people and children are more likely to copy behaviour of someone whom they identify as a role model. Now, obviously a role model is someone that they look up to. Now, role models' behaviours, which a child or person copies, FYI, the role model doesn't always need to be present for the behaviour to be replicated. They can witness it on social media or on TV, and because they admire them, they are more willing to copy that person's behaviour as a result. Now, this process is called modelling that the role model is demonstrating. They're modelling the behaviour which then the person looks at and then tries to copy due to factors out of their control. Now, the factors that are out of their control that they cannot necessarily prevent from them being considered a role model is the fact that, okay, if they are the same age, same gender, high status, or likeable or popular, much like Adele and Taylor Swift are the same age, same gender, high status, likeable, popular, etc., makes it more likely that if you are the same age as Adele or Taylor Swift and they do something bad, you're going to be more likely to copy them. So it's all about the fact that we're going to have these key factors which we identify within role model that then allows us to copy or be more prone to copying their behaviour. Now we're going to move on to the evaluation portion of the video. So we've moved through all the AO1 content at a really rapid pace there as well. So the evaluation content, make sure that we are trying to stick to using that PEAL format that I've spoken about in previous videos. Now, the importance of cognitive factors in learning. So this is the first portion of our evaluation. So neither classical nor operant conditioning can offer an adequate account of learning on their own. SRT demonstrates how humans and animals store the information about behaviours of others and make judgments as to whether they should replicate the behaviour or not. Now, SRT provides a comprehensive explanation of human learning, recognising the mediational processes and seeing that actually there is a process and a function that goes on within our minds that then allows us to create and recreate the behaviours that we observe. Now, the next evaluation point of the social learning theory is an over-reliance on evidence from lab studies. So, many of Bandura's proposed ideas for SRT were based on observations of young children in lab settings. He's been heavily criticised for this as lab settings are contrived, so they're not the child's natural environment, and the children may demonstrate demand characteristics. They may get the main goal of the whole investigation is to hit the Bobo doll and be as harsh as possible to it. Therefore, if they were in the condition which had the model which was more aggressive, they would recreate it because they're going, hey, that's what they want me to do. Therefore, this research is telling us very little about how children actually learn. So it's actually misinforming us about the idea of aggression in everyday life, about actually, do we learn through vicarious reinforcement, or is it something else that's built within us? Now, the next evaluation point is it underestimates the influence of biological factors. So Bandura in his research ignores the biological differences that exist between boys and girls. Boys are simply more aggressive than girls due to biological reasons. Now, there is a hormonal imbalance between boys and girls in this sense here, or hormonal differences, sorry. Now, boys have more testosterone, which therefore makes them more aggressive. Girls do not have as much testosterone, so therefore they are less aggressive. As well as that, there are other social factors that come into play here. The ways in which aggression is taught between these two sexes to be expressed is vastly different. Girls are taught to obviously not be overtly aggressive, whilst boys are encouraged to do so. This means that this important influence of behaviour is not accounted for within social learning theory, and they don't acknowledge that, okay, hormones may be the main difference as to why some of the participants might be more aggressive than others. Now, the last evaluation point is less determinist than the behaviourist approach. Now, Bandura emphasised reciprocal determinism in the sense that we are not merely influenced by our external environment, but we also exert influence upon it, whilst we still, in the sense, don't have free will entirely. Therefore, we choose to perform behaviour that we have witnessed and interact with. So, as a result, there is an element of choice and some free will in the way that we behave. But it's not wholeheartedly saying that we do go out and choose our own behaviours. Now, that is the end of the video for you guys. If you have got any questions, please pop them in, and we obviously run our Help Club sessions, which we'll be more than happy to help you with.